The first one is that of an infantile renal failure who presented with a oliguric renal failure following a brief acute gastroenteritis. The child was initially managed outside with initial measures of fluid resuscitation and furosemide challenge, but it did not establish any diuresis and the child was referred to us for the further care. When we went through the history, this child was a product of a third degree consanguineous marriage, and there was a significant family history with sibling deaths in the infancy. The exact cause could not be ascertained, although the child did have some convulsions at the time of the death. This child on examination was having severe failure to thrive with evidence of anemia and severe acidosis as a result of renal failure. Otherwise, there was no other suggestive finding on examination. If we look at the investigations, this child did have a severe anemia and all the metabolic derangements of the uremia and the renal failure, with the evidence of abnormal urinary sediment in the form of proteinuria and hematuria, and indices to suggest an intrinsic cause of renal failure in the form of high fractional excretion of sodium. The most striking thing on the examination and the investigations was that of a nephrocalcinosis, which was quite evident on the ultrasonography, with a near normal size of the kidneys. So if we look at this, the bright echo texture of the cortical area is well suggestive of the nephrocalcinosis in both the kidneys. And if we go through the DDs of nephrocalcinosis presenting at this early age of life, we have these following diagnoses which run through our mind. It could either be a drug-induced cause of renal failure and nephrocalcinosis. For example, furosemide, which is quite used very popularly in all the medical professionals. And vitamin D, which is also leading to a great amount of toxicity if not used judiciously. The other causes could be metabolic, like vitamin distal RTA, Barter's, hyperoxaluria, and the other purine metabolism defects. But if we link the nephrocalcinosis with renal failure, which has come up so early in life, then the differential diagnosis narrows down to just one or two, and those are usually the hyperoxalurias and the purine metabolism defects. So this was the consideration that we had when we evaluated the child and went through the history. As the child had not responded to the initial measures, the child had to be taken up for the peritoneal dialysis, which was taken up for 3 days. While on PD, the child did show improvement in the form of metabolic derangements being improved, but it was short-lived. As soon as the dialytic support was taken off, the child again started deteriorating. At this point in time, we anticipated a prolonged anuric course, and the child had to be taken up for a chronic dialysis, which in this case was a CAPD, which stands for a continuous ambulatory peritoneal dialysis. But at this point in time, looking into consideration the financial constraints that the family was going through, we had to offer a diagnosis on urgent basis, and as a result of which we had to subject the child to a kidney biopsy. Kidney biopsy did give us the diagnosis. It showed the kidney completely loaded with birefringent crystals of oxalate, as is well evident here. The first is a light microscopy and the second is a polarized microscopy, which highlights the crystals as a birefringence. So that makes a diagnosis of oxalosis kidney. Considering that the child has presented so early in life with end-stage renal disease requiring dialysis and nephrocalcinosis, the prognosis was grim, and the prognosis was explained to the parents. The treatment options were also explained. However, the parents were non-affording and they decided to discontinue the dialytic support and took the child home.
We have very profound kidney failure here already, that's established. So a liver alone would do nothing. And if we were to go with what was considered as the logical way of putting in a liver and then perhaps doing a kidney transplant, but that has now given way to a combined liver-kidney transplant. Now, you have a baby that's 4 kilos heavy, and Rakesh will agree with me, to put in a kidney and actually to get the right liver and close the abdomen at 4 kilos would be very tough. So what we would have done is to keep this child on dialysis, got him to grow with appropriate nutrition therapy, got him slightly bigger, worked on him to get a liver and a kidney, and then do a combined liver-kidney transplant.
So moving on to the second case, this is a similar but had a different course in time. This was a big girl, 6-year-old Muslim girl who presented with a colicky abdominal pain and all the symptomatology of a chronic kidney disease in the form of severe anemia, edema, short stretcher, breathlessness secondary to the acidosis, and a firm hepatosplenomegaly. This child also had been a product of a third-degree consanguineous marriage with multiple sibling deaths as an infantile renal failure, and in one of those required a peritoneal dialysis, and one of them, when it was evaluated, was found to have a nephrocalcinosis. So the diagnosis could be made quite early in life because of the significant family history in the earlier siblings. This child, when was evaluated, was already into CKD stage 5, that is the end-stage renal disease requiring a dialytic support. She was extensively investigated, although she progressed to a renal failure at the age of 6 years. But when she was first seen, that was the age of 5 months, when she was referred to evaluation in view of the significant family deaths. At this point in time, she was diagnosed as hyperoxaluria. This is a summary of her investigations from 5th month of age to the 6 years. As can be seen here, she although presented at 5 months when she did not have any renal failure, but she had certain abnormalities to suggest some metabolic derangements which were going on. For example, the urinary calcium by create ratio was quite high, 0.9. If we take as cutoff, it is 0.6 or 0.5 in the infancy. So this was definitely high, with a significant urinary sediment revealing proteinuria and some hematuria. Progressively, the child over time progressed to the end-stage renal disease. And at this point in time, when she was further evaluated, nephrocalcinosis was also evident. When we had the diagnosis of hyperoxaluria, a consideration of liver transplant was definitely considered, and it was also explained to the parents, the options, but the financial constraints did not support that idea, and the parents did not opt for that option as a modality of therapy. The child relentlessly progressed to the end-stage renal disease, and here we can see the normal values of 24 hours oxalate excretion, which were being discussed right now. Less than 2 mg per kg on a 24-hour sample, or if we take the body surface area into consideration, less than 45 mg per 1.73 meters square. So we can also see here that she had all the metabolic derangements of renal failure in the form of high phosphorus, low calcium, severe acidosis, which was later on corrected with a severe anemia. The child was although put on renal supportive medications, and empirically we started her on oral pyridoxine for whatever benefit it could have offered. However, the child continued to deteriorate, and finally she succumbed to the terminal event in the form of a cardiac dysfunction related to the pulmonary edema. So now we know for sure that all the crystals need not be good all the time, and especially in the case of primary hyperoxalurias, when it could even prove to be life-threatening if the appropriate measures are not taken early in life. To know little more on the topic, already some issues have already been discussed. We would like to have the experts' opinion on these few questions which come to the mind when we consider primary hyperoxalurias. So I would request the seniors to kindly guide us on these following questions.
Well, I think we're going to look up to Dr. Mehta to answer some of these. I think a few have been discovered, but have been discussed. But let's go in the list that you've nicely made. So, Professor Mehta. Clinical presentations, these were very typical, but can we have atypical presentations?
There are certain extrarenal, affection due to the hyperoxalosis, ophthalmic examination. Some case reports are there that the first time hyperoxalosis was discovered on the ophthalmic examination because of the deposits of oxalate in the retina. But this must be very rare, I'm sure. And then, of course, I believe strongly in this particular child, though echocardiography, we could not make out whether there was oxalate in the myocardium, that probably the cardiac event was not as a result of a renal failure as much as maybe the oxalate, deposition in the myocardium. And the other, of course, if they live long enough, they have joints, they have also, joints and ligaments, even the nerves can be affected, arteries can be affected. Resistant anemia has been described as one of the causes of hyperoxalosis. That means you give all your nutritional support and still the anemia doesn't, you must do the oxalate levels. And almost except liver. Liver is a savior for hyperoxalosis. I have not come across any sort of a case report where the liver was there or liver cell failure had occurred. Probably that needs to be. So many of the other organs, but classical example is what this particular case is. Nephrocalcinosis, nephrolithiasis, family history of early deaths, and ultimately the chronic renal failure.
Because I don't think primarily hyperoxaluria ever causes the liver failure. The enzyme deficiency is in the liver because of genetic defect, but its liver is not affected, and that's the reason you do the liver transplantation. So it would be interesting to look into why the liver enzymes were deranged, but definitely not because of hyperoxaluria.
Okay. Well, if there are no more questions, I'm going to ask Pramod and Priya to comment, the final comments.
Just make one comment regarding liver transplants and management of patients like this. there is something, I'm sure Rakesh will back me up on that when you combine both liver and kidney transplant, the liver seems to have an immune tolerant effect. So the kind of rejection episodes that you see as a nephrologist, you wouldn't have if you could do combined liver kidney transplants. And something that we do at our institution is to try and harness that potential right at the get-go without temporizing a great deal that maybe we should do a kidney transplant first and then come to a liver transplant.
Thank you.
Any points, Priya?